All right, good afternoon or morning or whenever it is you happen to be watching this. So for those of you that are on my on-campus class, I had a couple that sounded like they were not going to be able to be there due to some weather events or other things outside of their control. So I thought I would just do a video to address both classes. So you get to see inside my horribly messy office here. And I thought I'd throw my face on there so you guys could see that in great detail. The glare off my poor bald head will probably reflect on your monitor. So, all right, let's talk about last week really quickly as kind of a wrap up. So there was a lot of materials in here, just to make sure everybody's aware. So let me put this into the student view real quick. All right, so there's a lot of materials in here that are for your use in making sure that you're able to get through there. So things like the flashcards, the PowerPoints, they're all available in here. Give you some extra parts here. There are these little questions here. Now, what I will say is those questions are scaled points. So although it's only 1 point here, at the end of the semester, those will be a percentage of your total grade. So they are not worth 1/100th of what the simulation lab is. The simulation labs also will be scaled out. Rather than try to fight with Cengage, which I do on a regular basis anyway, I just left the point values alone, and then we'll scale it at the end of the semester. And so as that process occurs, we'll look at that. So there is this particular assignment that you should have done last week. Not assignment, just a reading. So we'll talk a lot about Krebs on security. It's a post I go to a lot just to look at what's going on. These practice tests often have the same questions or similar ones to the quiz, so it's a really, really good way to do that. I try to put PowerPoints and different pieces in. The SolarWinds video just happens to be one of the most egregious cases, so I try to throw that in there. All right, so let's look at week 2. Couple of things in here. So anything with points, so there are some critical activities here. There's a simulation and there's a quiz. And I think we might, let me look at this, and I might actually just pull this out for this week. Simply because I think we're already overloading you guys a little bit, and we've had a short week with Martin Luther King Day and with the snow day off. I encourage you to watch these about social engineering, power. This one's kind of interesting if you really get down in the weeds about how to build a keylogger. In other words, everything on a computer gets recorded, whatever you're typing. So one of those events. So I want to go through a couple of items in here. So let's see if I can get this to open in student view. Maybe not. All right, hang on. I got to go back to always makes it a little more fun sometimes with Cengage. Let's do it this way. Right, so I do have to go in and go grade these, but I wanted to look at a couple of these. Let me get my face out of the way there. So I want you to do some thinking about these questions, because these are things that we're actually seeing happen right now. False positives or false negatives. Which one is worse? Which one is... So if I think about it, if you get a diagnostic test, is a false positive or false negative worse? What about facial recognition? So some states have actually passed some legislation on facial recognition. One of the things we know is that facial recognition for people of color is not nearly as accurate, and we've seen a lot of errors in that, and that's simply the technology and the programming has not reached a level where there's equity in there. a vulnerability scan. So now, do I want a one-page paper? No. What I want you to do is simply a quick paragraph of your findings on there. Like what do you think and what have you found when you did a little looking at those particular items? All right, pen test scanners. You need to go out and you're going to find 3 scanners that you can find, and what are their elements? So a simple table, vulnerability scanners, talking about Nessus. So I want you to look at what things are out there on Nessus really quickly, and again, it's a paragraph or short. Look at what other things are out there. Why would I choose one over the other? So as you look at those, I'm not looking for a APA formatted with resources. As long as you tell me where something came from, I'm good with that. Back in this one. All right. So there is a simulation lab, and so there's something called the National Vulnerability Database, and so this just gives you a little bit of exploration in that area. Security for Life. These are just some frameworks that you can look at. There is in this, it'll say do all these things. It's really just to get you introduced to that framework. The same way with this module here, looking at resources and some other pieces out there. So I want you guys to have, when you leave this class, I don't expect you to have memorized every single item in here. What I want you to do is be able to use the resources that are out there to be a better person, better manager, more secure, and safer. So Chapter 2, obviously, here's a quiz for Chapter 2, and you know what? I'm just going to take that out right there. We're going to delete that assignment from your ability to even do it. So, but I do ask that you look at these, the social engineering, power infrastructure, and both of these should scare you, quite frankly, when you look at them. You should be a little frightened. So as we're going into there, we're looking at how do those things happen. Go thing. Some point Cengage will load. There we go. Alright, so these are those flashcards, and a lot of this chapter is really the idea of a lot of vocabulary and a lot of looking at how things are done. So if you go through these and you have kind of an idea what some of these items are, so for example, what's a vulnerability scan? When I say pivot, so for example, I managed to hack into or get into a camera system, am I able to, or the actors able to take that and then manage to get into another system on our campus or in another place? So this is just a really great resource to log through those. I think a lot of people use flashcards for a whole lot of reasons. The PowerPoints go through a lot of the material that we have in here also, so I try to go over some of these. I don't necessarily hit every single of the predefined ones, but I also talk about some other stuff that I think is important and as we've changed. There we are. So I want to look at just a couple of items in here as we go through here. So we've already kind of talked about, and you should have a video about from the live class where I talked about penetration testing and vulnerability scanning a little bit. So hopefully you have some ideas on these, but why think about in terms of development, why we would do a vulnerability scanning, why we would use an external resource versus an internal. So those are kind of the things that are important in there to think about. So now there's a lot of more acronyms out there, and in fact sometimes there needs to be just an incomplete dictionary, because part of these, I will say, is companies develop some new software or new product, and all of a sudden we have new acronyms, and sometimes these are actually doing the same thing that something else is doing. We just call it with a different name. So be aware of that. So SIEM and SOAR. So this really says I'm going to do all kinds of things with my logs, is what it's really looking at. So in our computer, especially on our servers and such, we do a lot of logging at the firewalls, other places. So we look at those logs. We can do a data management tool like this where we have a dashboard. Graphics stand out to us, and we can start to understand why things happen or when they don't happen. So one of the ways we do that is we look at what's happening on the outside world. What are actors out in all kinds of discussion boards or other areas talking about? So a SOAR is very similar, so this actually combines more extensive data. Now, here's the problem. In most IT shops, so let's take Peru State College, we're not big enough to have somebody whose only job is to look at logs and look at what's going on in the world around us. So we have to rely on some other resources, and some of those are things like we're purchasing a service to update firewalls so that new and existing threats are all caught. So there are places where we can get data feeds. So the U.S. government has several of them that you can get information about. If you look at some of those, it will scare the living daylights out of you because it seems like everybody and anybody is trying to attack you at every moment in time. Well, that's sort of true though. So, and we'll talk about how we can find some of those. So threat hunting is this idea that we're already been attacked, and we have to figure out what is happening with our system, and how do we find out what data has been accessed, who's been accessing it, why are they accessing it, how, and all of those kinds of things. And when we have attacks like that SolarWinds, like our video from chapter 1, where the same software that's supposed to protect you has been compromised and now is installed all over, we do need to work on some of those. So again, those little quizzes in there are kind of interesting, so you might make sure you look at those. So we have all different kinds of resources out there. So a framework, and so that's where I kind of hit you a little bit with some introduction to that. So there are all different kinds of frameworks that have already set up some processes and some plans, group policies, for example, that say this is what you need to do to be as safe as possible. So the most common one is one from NIST. So NIST does a lot of things. It's a federal government organization. We get a lot of things from them, and if you go onto NIST's website, there is tons of information about that. So if you're interested in accountancy, the accountant group has actually some frameworks. ISO has frameworks. The CenterNet for Internet Security, Cloud Security Alliance, and there's probably 100 more out there that have some of these frameworks that we can then look at our network or look at our company and how we stand out against some of these frameworks. So NIST has their framework in kind of a 5-cycle. So detect, respond, recover, identify, and protect. So anywhere in there, you notice it's a circular. It never ends. We go on and frustrate it, or continue on with our efforts. There are also some regulations that are out there. So, for example, Peru being an educational facility, we have to comply with FERPA regulations in all of our electronics. A lot of companies have to deal, if you're a medical institution, you have to deal with HIPAA compliance. There's state, there's federal laws. If we're doing international business, it may be another country or some international laws we have to comply with. So some of them that have been hitting from the European Union, there's some data protection laws that have coming in, and so we're seeing some impact of that because they've changed some rules different than what we typically would do. But if we want to play in their space, that's where we're at. So there are some of those that, for example, around here, one of them, we have a nuclear plant 25 miles from Peru at Cooper Nuclear Station. Well, almost all power plants fall under a lot of federal regulation, and then the nuclear layer adds another piece on top of that. So one of the problems is all states have different kinds of regulations, and what do I have to report if I'm attacked? How do we deal with it? So be aware of that there are lots of those. We also have these standards. So PCI is one of those. If we're going to process credit card data, we have a lot of regulations according to them to get certified so that you can do that. And most places outsource this then. So Peru, if you notice, if you've tried to pay your bill or a parking ticket, we don't process that directly. There's a service that works as an intermediary, and that way we don't have to be PCI compliant. We just slide it over to somebody else. It's not a bad way to do it, quite frankly. And then we have this idea of benchmark. So how do we apply a typical setup? How do we follow things like maybe HP has a set of, these are our best ideas, this is what you should do. So sometimes these are very specific. So if I have HP web servers, there's a lot of HP stuff that'll come out, or Dell, or whoever. I have a lot of these groups. So there's all different kinds of places out there. Conferences, there's journals about cybersecurity, local industry groups, so not local necessarily to Peru, but there is a cybersecurity group in Nebraska that meets once a month, usually virtually because it's during my lunch times, but I get some interesting information about what's going on from other people in there. Social media, and one of them I will say about social media is check your facts. But there are some social media for cybersecurity individuals and things that are probably a little better. If it shows up on Facebook, I'd probably be a little worried about it. There are requests for comments, white papers, all different kinds of documents out there. So this is a thought process. You're not required to do this. Obviously, I left it in there, but think about this as an option or an idea. So we're going to talk about some of these tools, including these penetration testing tools and things. Is it safe for us to use those? Because if I come up with let's say a tool like a hatchet can be a great resource for you. Cut firewood. Firemen can use it to chop down a door, but can it also be used as a weapon? Yes. So we have the same issues with a lot of these tools that we're going to look at. So make sure that you have read through this chapter really well. I will go back to it. Week 2. Week 2. Thank you, Canvas. There we go, finally. All right. So I deleted that so you won't see this assignment anymore. But do watch these, please, over the weekend if you haven't had a chance to do that. Ask questions. Think about what's recently going on in our environment around us. So this just recently happened, and not too far from our location, but last week Iowa's largest school district canceled classes for at least 2 days. Now there's not a lot of information yet out about this, but they apparently had some kind of a cyber attack. So 30,000 students didn't go to school because of a cybersecurity attack. Here's what's really critical. If we don't pay 5,000 teachers and their staff, that's probably a bigger issue that we need to worry about. So think about those things around us. We're going to start doing some discussion boards where we're looking for recent events and things. So if you come across one, kind of bookmark it or think about it, jot a note down to yourself, and think about where those items are going to come from. So, all right. I need to go into the, which class am I in? So there's an online course and there's an on-campus section. So I'm in the on-campus section right now. After I finish this recording, I will stop and I will update the information so that you have the same items to do, or not to do, I guess, in Canvas here. All right. So